He returned home for a wedding not expecting to find the one woman who would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and what it means to belong. Why did a bridesmaid's quiet strength make a millionaire question his entire empire? Can a man who built skyscrapers in cities he barely lived in rebuild a town he once left behind? And when love begins, not with grand gestures, but with a shared glance, a forgotten gazebo, and the courage to stay, can it truly last? This is not just a love story. It's about second chances, about a town on the brink, and two hearts learning to trust again. If you've ever wondered whether it's too late to start over, or whether a quiet act of kindness can change everything, then this story is for you. Like this video, share it with someone who believes in love that grows from the roots, and don't forget to subscribe to Shining Stories. Now let us begin. It had been nearly 2 decades since Caleb Walker set foot in Maplewood, a town so still and quiet it seemed untouched by time. Yet as he stood at the edge of the reception hall, wearing a deep navy suit that whispered of the city's tailored luxury, it wasn't the rustic charm of his old hometown that unsettled him. It was her. Across the room, amidst the laughter and clinking glasses, a bridesmaid in a rose-colored dress moved through the crowd with grace born not of elegance, but of purpose. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, a ripple, like wind brushing still water. "You've been staring for quite some time, Mr. Big Ambitions," she said as she approached, offering him a glass of sparkling wine. Her tone was light, but her eyes hazel and unflinching were anything but. "Just wondering how Ethan managed to convince someone like you to stand by his side today," Caleb replied, adjusting his cufflinks out of habit more than need. "Someone like me," she repeated, arching an eyebrow. The soft fabric of her dress caught the golden light, giving her the glow of someone too real to be simply passing through. Caleb smiled, almost wistfully. "Someone who probably thinks I traded my roots for profit margins. I suppose when a man leaves the place that raised him for 17 years, vanishes into the skyline for almost 20, and returns with shoes worth more than what folks here earn in a week, he should expect assumptions," she said. Her name was Grace Miller, and from the way she spoke, Caleb already knew she was not the type to entertain small talk. The rehearsal dinner carried on around them, but Caleb found himself leaning into their quiet conversation as if the whole room had faded to nothing. "You don't know me," he said at last. "I know enough," Grace replied without hesitation. "Ethan told me how inseparable you two were, until success called you away. And now you're back, just for the ceremony, before retreating again. People are not something you set down when convenient. Mr. Walker." Her words hit harder than he expected. Caleb had built his own empire, a development firm that reshaped skylines. But standing here, he didn't feel powerful. He felt like he was 12 again, trying to prove himself on the dusty fields of Maplewood. "Chasing dreams meant letting go of some things," he said, voice lower now, less sure. "And did you chase something worth the letting go?" she asked, and for the first time, the edge in her voice softened into something almost tender. Before he could answer, a familiar hand clapped his back. "There you are, Ethan," the groom beamed. "Two of my favorite people, finally talking." He turned to Grace with a smile full of memories. "Grace and I shared crayons and secrets back in 1st grade. And Caleb here, you should have seen the chaos we caused when we were 10. "I can imagine," Grace said, her smile tighter this time. "Come on, Caleb, they're waiting for your toast," Ethan said, tugging him gently away. Later, on the hotel balcony overlooking a quiet lake, Caleb stood beside Ethan, both of them holding drinks under a sky painted in indigo. "It is good having you back," Ethan said. Caleb gave a non-committal hum. "Some folks aren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat." Ethan chuckled. "Grace is fierce, but she is loyal. Always has been. She sees through people. That's all. Doesn't care for suits and titles. She thinks I abandoned this place. She thinks you forgot what matters. Ethan replied gently. Then, after a pause, he added, speaking of which, I might need to postpone the honeymoon. The hospital bills after Mama's heart surgery there's just too much. No, Caleb said immediately. I'll help. I didn't tell you so you to pay for it. I know, Caleb said quietly, but some things shouldn't have to wait. Hours later, while walking through the dimly lit lobby, Caleb heard the soft, uneven sobs of a child. Following the sound, he found Grace kneeling beside a small boy, no older than 6, whose tears glistened on his cheeks. It's all right, sweetheart, she whispered, brushing the boy's damp curls from his forehead. We were going to find your mom. Okay, I promise. Caleb stopped, struck not just by the tenderness in her voice, but by the way the child seemed to trust her entirely. I am scared, the boy hiccuped. Grace nodded, never breaking eye contact with the child. Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. It means you're human, and brave people keep going, even when it's hard. He watched as she helped hotel staff reunite the boy with his frantic mother. Only then did she look up and notice him, standing just beyond the light. That was... Caleb searched for words as she approached. Just part of the job, she said with a shrug. I am a pediatric nurse. She was about to leave, but something made her pause. The children I care for, many of them, fight battles most adults can't imagine. And when they cry at 3 a.m, they don't need donations or promises. They need people. Then she walked away, her footsteps fading down the corridor, leaving Caleb behind with a silence so full it echoed louder than applause ever could. For the first time since he arrived in Maplewood, he wondered if this return wasn't just for a wedding. Maybe. It was the start of something he didn't know he needed to find again. The boy's cheeks were streaked with tears, his sobs hiccuping through shallow breaths. Grace knelt in front of him, her voice a steady whisper in the dim glow of the hotel lobby. It's all right, sweetheart, she murmured, her hand gently stroking his back. We'll find your mom, I promise. Her words were soft, but to Caleb Walker, watching just a few steps away, they carried a strength that froze him mid-step. Something in the way she held the childish hand not out of duty, but instinct made time slow. I'm scared, the boy whispered, voice trembling like the ribbon of light on the tiled floor. Grace offered a smile so warm it could melt fear. I know, darling. But courage doesn't mean the fear goes away. It means you do what needs doing even when you are scared. Caleb stood there, unnoticed, watching her speak to the hotel staff, checking for guests with children, piecing together the puzzle. A few minutes later, a woman rushed in, panic painted across her face. My son! She cried. Grace turned to her, calm as ever. He's okay! He's right here! The mother dropped to her knees, scooping the boy into her arms, sobbing her gratitude. Only then did Grace seem to sense Caleb's presence. She glanced over her shoulder, and for the briefest moment, something flickered across her expression. Was it embarrassment, or something deeper, more exposed? That was remarkable, Caleb said, stepping forward. She stood, brushing her hands against her skirt. It is part of what I do. You're a teacher, he guessed. A pediatric nurse, she said, glancing away. The children I work with, they face things most of us never will. Cancer, chronic illnesses, pain, but they still find joy. They remind me every day what really matters. She paused, as if considering whether to say more. Then she added, quietly but firmly, a crying child at 3 a.m. doesn't care about money or titles. They need hands to hold, hearts that listen. With that, she walked past him, leaving Caleb alone with a thought that wouldn't stop echoing. He had everything, yet felt emptier than ever. For the first time since returning to Maplewood, he wondered if this trip wasn't just about old promises. Maybe it was about rediscovering something he didn't know he had lost. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the stained glass windows of the church hall. Ribbons, garlands, and fresh flowers were scattered across folding tables. Caleb stood there awkwardly, holding a length of greenery like it was an alien object. "You're holding that upside down," Grace said, appearing beside him and reaching for the garland. "Didn't realize garland had a right side," Caleb replied, watching her deft fingers untwist it with ease. "There's a right way to do most things," she said. This time, her voice was less sharp, more amused. They had been assigned to decorate together. Sarah's idea, no doubt. The two of them now stood among vases and floral wire, alone except for the quiet creak of the wooden floor. "So," Grace said, breaking the silence, "Maplewood's favorite prodigal son returns. How does it feel?" "Smaller than I remember," he admitted, looping ribbon through a centerpiece. "But not all that changed. I noticed the community center in trouble, and Main Street looks half empty." Grace nodded, passing him scissors. "Cut those, and I'll give you a crash course in small-town economics." For the next hour, as their hands worked and voices filled the space, she told him everything: the old manufacturing plant that closed 5 years ago, the steady flow of young people moving away, the center that had become a shelter of sorts, now facing the axe due to budget cuts. "This town shaped you, Caleb," she said quietly. "You built your future on the foundation it gave you, but you never looked back." He wanted to argue, to explain the deadlines, the pressure, the whirlwind that pulled him away, but he didn't, because she was right. "Show me," he said instead. Later that afternoon, Grace drove him around Maplewood in a faded blue sedan with a cracked dashboard and one stubborn air vent that refused to stay still. They passed the abandoned factory, the fading storefronts, and finally pulled into the lot of a weathered brick building, the community center. Inside, the sounds of life echoed off the walls. Children played basketball beneath flickering lights. Seniors chatted over steaming cups of soup. A makeshift clinic operated in a far corner. "This is where I come when I am not at the hospital," Grace explained. "Sarah runs youth programs here. It is not much, but it matters." Just then, a little boy wearing a baseball cap ran toward them. His small frame was pale, his smile too wide for someone so thin. "Miss Grace, did you bring the stickers today?" "Not today, Lucas," she laughed, bending down to his level. "But I brought someone better. This is Caleb. He grew up here too." Lucas stared at Caleb's sleek watch, eyes wide. "Are you rich?" Grace gave Caleb a playful glare. He knelt beside the boy, leveling with him. "I have a good job. What about you?" "Got any dreams? I want to be a doctor," Lucas said proudly, removing his cap to reveal a head smooth from chemotherapy. "Like Grace. I want to help kids like me." Caleb felt something in his chest twist deep, heavy, and real. He didn't know it yet. But in that moment, something inside him shifted for good. Caleb crouched down beside the boy, his knees creaking slightly on the polished gymnasium floor. "I work in real estate," he said. "But what about you? Got plans?" The child tilted his head thoughtfully. "I want to be a doctor, like Miss Grace, so I can help kids like me." He pulled off his cap, revealing a smooth scalp that didn't need explanation. Caleb felt the breath catch in his throat. It was a quiet kind of pain, the kind that didn't announce itself but settled deep. "That's a solid dream," Caleb said softly, "and I believe you'll get there." As the afternoon sun began to fade, Grace took a detour on their way back. They drove past rows of clapboard houses and old elm trees until she slowed near a white two-story home with peeling shutters and a familiar porch swing. "This was yours, wasn't it?" she asked. Caleb gave a slow nod. "Yeah. New owners now." He didn't ask to stop. He wasn't sure he could. The memories came too fast. Bikes in the yard, winter mornings on those steps, the sound of his mother's voice from the kitchen window. They continued driving until they reached Maplewood Park, where the old gazebo stood like a forgotten relic in the center of town. Its paint had chipped in places, and ivy clung to its posts, but it remained quietly beautiful. "I had my first kiss here," Caleb said, stepping up and running a hand along the weathered railing. Grace sat on the steps, looking up at him with a half-smile. "Let me guess, Madison Blake." His eyebrows rose. "How do you know Sarah and I moved here in 5th grade?" She replied, "You were already something of a legend, the boy with the big dreams and a heart set on getting out. Madison talked about that kiss for at least 2 years. Caleb laughed, but it faded into something more reflective. "And you always knew you to be a nurse." Grace's expression shifted, growing quiet. "My brother was diagnosed with leukemia when we were kids," she said. "We practically lived in hospitals for a while. The nurses, they were more than just caregivers. They were light in the darkest place. I knew then. Is he okay? He's doing great." She nodded. "He's 29 now, teaching music in Chicago." She looked at him more closely. "What about you? Is the man you became everything that boy dreamed of?" Caleb hesitated. His voice, when it came, was low. The success came, the deals, the buildings, the wealth, but the loneliness that wasn't part of the plan. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition. Maybe the way one soul notices another beginning to shift. That night, after helping Sarah with a few last-minute details for the wedding, Caleb made a quiet phone call to a travel agent. No names, no credit cards, just an anonymous request to upgrade Ethan and Sarah's honeymoon suite. When asked how to explain the sudden gift, Caleb replied simply, "Say it was a promotion. Something lucky." Later, at Maplewood's only bar, the bachelor party unfolded with humble charm. A few old friends, laughter, and stories that had aged like the town itself. To Ethan, Caleb raised his glass, the one who stayed, the one who found what matters. When they found a quiet moment, Ethan nudged him. "I saw you with Grace today. She was just showing me around. She doesn't just do anything. You should know that by now." Caleb exhaled slowly. "She thinks I'm a stranger with a wallet. She is not impressed by money. Caleb, she is impressed by presence and truth." Later that night, Caleb and Grace found themselves carrying a stack of wedding gifts through the quiet park. The stars above Maplewood were brighter than he remembered them ever being. "We can cut through the gazebo," Grace said. "It's faster." They set the boxes on the wooden bench and paused. The moonlight slanted through the lattice above, casting pale shadows across her face. She looked almost like a memory, almost like something he'd been searching for without knowing it. "I was wrong about you," she said, finally breaking the silence. "Not completely, but enough." Caleb smiled, his voice gentle. "I'll take that as high praise." Despite her words, she didn't step away. Instead, she stepped closer. He felt the weight of the moment pressing against them real, heavy, and strange in its sweetness. He leaned in. She didn't stop him. Their lips met soft at first, then more certain. It wasn't the kind of kiss that asked for promises. It simply acknowledged something that had already begun to bloom between them. But when it ended, Grace stepped back, fingers brushing her lips like she was trying to hold on to the moment and let it go all at once. "This was a mistake," she whispered. You were leaving in 2 days. Back to that other world. What if I stayed, Don, to say things you don't mean? Who says I don't? Grace shook her head. Maplewood is a nostalgic weekend for you, not your future. She picked up the boxes and walked away, her steps quiet but sure, leaving Caleb standing in the gazebo, unsure whether he'd just lost something or begun to find it. The morning of Ethan and Sarah's wedding arrived clear and bright. Caleb stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, his best man speech folded neatly in the pocket of his suit. Through the window, he could see the guests arriving at the little white church across the road. His phone buzzed with messages from the office deadlines, investors, decisions only he could make. For the first time in years, he let them wait. As Caleb stood by the window of his hotel room, he watched the first guests file into the small white church across the street. Their laughter and chatter floated faintly on the morning air, weaving into the soft ringing of bells. His phone buzzed again and again. The city, contracts waiting, deals stalling, meetings only he could lead. But for the first time in over a decade, he simply pressed silence. No response, no rush, just a pause. Across the street, in the bridal suite. Grace helped Sarah fasten her veil. The lace shimmered as sunlight touched it. "You look beautiful," Grace whispered, her eyes misting. Sarah turned, her voice playful beneath the emotion. "And what about you? Are we going to pretend that kiss yesterday didn't happen?" Grace froze. Her hands halted mid-adjustment. "Who told you Ethan saw you?" Sarah replied, grinning. "From the edge of the park," he thrilled. "By the way, there's nothing to be thrilled about," Grace said. "Maybe too quickly. He's leaving tomorrow." Sarah studied her, softening. "Maybe. But I've never seen you look at anyone the way you looked at him." By 11 o'clock, the chapel doors closed and the ceremony began. Caleb stood beside Ethan, both dressed in black and white, but only one of them looked wholly at peace. Across the aisle, Grace sat quietly. Her pale rose dress caught the sunlight spilling through stained glass, giving her the illusion of something ethereal, half dream, half fire. Caleb's eyes kept drifting to her, and when hers met his, she didn't look away. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and promises. Then the celebration moved to the town hall, now strung with lights and the scent of home-cooked food. Caleb made his way through a sea of familiar faces, many older than he remembered, most surprised to see him again. He shook hands, nodded, smiled, but none of it anchored him. Until it was time. He rose from his seat and gently tapped his glass. The room slowly hushed. "I've known Ethan Roberts since we were 5. Caleb began, voice steady but touched with something raw. "We built forts in the woods, snuck candy into school, and spent every summer dreaming about who we might become. I chased those dreams to distant cities. Ethan found what truly mattered right here." He looked across the room to where Grace had been. She was gone. He paused, collected himself. "This weekend reminded me of what real success looks like. It is not in contracts or skyscrapers. It's in community, in love, in showing up." A small smile touched his lips. "And on that note, Ethan and Sarah, your honeymoon is now a presidential suite in Maui." Gasps, laughter, applause. But Caleb wasn't done. "One more thing," he said, and the room quieted again. "I am not leaving Maplewood tomorrow. In fact, I've just opened a new branch of Walker Development right here." Murmurs. Surprise. "My first project," he continued, "the old community center. Not to demolish it, but to restore it, to expand the clinic, offer space to small businesses, and keep it as the heart of this town." The applause swelled, but Caleb's eyes scanned the room, searching for her, for Grace. She wasn't there. He found her by the lake, standing alone beneath the same tree where they had walked the day before. The breeze lifted her hair as she looked out over the still water, arms wrapped around herself like a shield. "Running out during my speech, I take it you weren't impressed?" Caleb asked softly as he approached. Grace didn't turn. "What are you doing?" "Caleb. Trying to make things right." With what money grand gestures? He flinched at the sharpness in her tone. "I don't need a millionaire swooping in to save the day," she continued, finally facing him, eyes flashing. "Is that what this is?" "No," he said quickly. "Grace, this isn't just about you." "Then what is it?" Caleb stepped closer, hands open at his sides. "It's about all of it. Being back, seeing Ethan life, the community center, watching you work with those kids. It cracked something open in me." He exhaled, voice raw. "I've spent the last 15 years building towers in cities that already had enough. Meanwhile, towns like this, my town, are barely hanging on." "So what?" she said, eyes narrowing. "We rub your redemption arc now." "No," he said gently. "You my reminder." She said nothing, her breath catching slightly. "I am not saying this well," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "But yesterday, when Lucas told me he wanted to be a doctor, it hit me. That boy, with so little, carries more purpose than I've felt in years." Grace looked at him, something in her face shifting. Her anger didn't disappear, but it softened. Behind it, there was hurt, and something else, hope. "When Lucas said he wanted to be a doctor," Caleb said, his voice low and even, "it made me realize I've never used everything I have to do something that truly matters." Grace's eyes softened, not in pity, but in recognition. "You can to buy meaning, Caleb." "I know," he replied, "but I can use my resources to support what has meaning. The community center, this town, you." That last word hung in the air between them. "I've only known you for a few days," he said, taking a slow breath. "But somehow, you've made me question everything I thought I wanted." Grace shook her head, almost smiling. "This is completely irrational." "Maybe, but irrational doesn't mean wrong. You live in the city," she reminded him. "Parts of me do," he said. "But who says I can build something real here too?" He reached for her hand, "At least stick around long enough to make sure I don't mess it up." A reluctant smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Someone should supervise you." Exactly what I was thinking. As they walked back toward the hall, the newlyweds, Ethan and Sarah, emerged through a flurry of laughter and rice. "What did you do?" Ethan asked, pulling Caleb into a fierce hug. "The presidential suite," Caleb said with a grin. "You two deserve it." Sarah hugged Grace tightly. "Fix things with him," she whispered. "He looks at you the way Ethan looks at me." The getaway car pulled away with streamers trailing behind. Caleb and Grace stood side by side, not touching, but more aware of each other than of anything else around them. "I still don't trust your motives completely," Grace murmured. "Fair enough," Caleb said. "Guess I'll just have to stay long enough to prove them." As he looked out over the gathering crowd and the quiet streets of Maplewood beyond, something shifted inside him, a stirring of purpose not tied to market value or profit. For the first time in years, he felt like he was standing exactly where he was meant to be. 3 weeks passed. Caleb now worked out of a small corner office in what used to be the manager's room at the community center. Blueprints covered his desk, along with scattered notes from town meetings. He was on the phone, pacing slowly. "I get it, David." "I do," he said, voice calm but firm. "But I am not walking away from the Chicago expansion. I am broadening the scope. This isn't about a quick return, it's about long-term, grounded growth." The voice on the other end was skeptical. Caleb had expected that. Just then, a soft knock. He looked up. Grace stood in the doorway, still in her hospital scrubs. I'll call you back, Caleb said quickly, then set the phone down. Hey. Bad time, perfect time. He smiled. Please, rescue me from explaining community-focused reinvestment to a man who measures everything in quarterly margins. She stepped inside, her presence somehow making the room feel less crowded with paper and pressure. Sarah called from Hawaii. She said, apparently, the presidential suite comes with a private chef. Ethan S. gained 5 pounds already. Caleb laughed. He needed it. She also asked about us? His smile faded slightly. And what did you say? That you were better at listening than I thought, especially to what people actually need. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Coming from you, that's high praise. Dante, get used to it, she replied, though her tone was lighter than it had been in days. She paused. Actually, I came to ask a favor. Name it. It S. Lucas, she said, her voice now carrying the weight of worry. He S. had some complications. The treatment he needs is only available at a Children's S. hospital in the city. His family can't afford it, and the hospital charity fund has a wait list. Caleb was already reaching for his phone. What is his full name, Caleb? Grace warned gently. You can just throw money at I am not, he said, lifting a hand. My college roommate is chief of pediatric oncology at the city medical center. Let me make a call. Grace didn't stop him this time. She just watched. And for the first time, maybe she let herself hope. That evening, after hanging up the call, Caleb Walker made quiet arrangements. Not only would Lucas be seen by one of the city's top pediatric specialists, but transportation and temporary housing for his family would be handled discreetly, no explanations, no spotlight. Caleb specifically asked his friend at the hospital to keep his name out of it. The next morning, the community center buzzed with new energy. Renovations had officially begun. The sound of hammers echoed against old bricks as hopes were rebuilt alongside the walls. As Caleb stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, he caught fragments of conversation between two contractors by the loading dock. Bet he tears it all down eventually, one muttered. Developers always do. Maybe, the other replied, but at least he is asking what we want before he does anything. Caleb pretended not to hear, but their words clung to him like dust. Trust would take time, maybe longer than blueprints or money could buy. Weeks passed. The clinic section was prioritized first. Caleb shuttled between Maplewood and the city, juggling both his old world and the one he was beginning to claim as home. Despite early doubts, local shop owners began approaching him about spaces in the revitalized center. He made sure to hire Maplewood residents for as much of the work as possible. One late evening, as he reviewed floor plans under dim light in the old office, a familiar knock came at the door. Grace leaned in, still in her scrubs. Lucas got approved, she said, eyes wide with relief. They moved him up the list. That almost never happens. His parents are over the moon. Caleb kept his face calm, just smiled. That is wonderful. She studied him carefully. You had nothing to do with it. He cleared his throat, then replied in the driest tone he could muster. Patient confidentiality prevents me from confirming or denying involvement. Grace narrowed her eyes. You were a terrible liar. Caleb Walker. I know, he said, chuckling, but connecting people, that's what I do. She stepped inside and sat across from him. Why didn't you want credit? He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. Because you were right. I don't want to be the guy who just throws money at problems. I want to build something that matters, something that lasts. Her face softened, just slightly. You're not what I expected. You mean, not a soulless developer? The jury is still out. She teased. But the smile that followed was genuine. The following weekend, the community center hosted its first fundraiser. Caleb had planned to drop in briefly, just long enough to show his support. But he stayed. Conversations flowed. Laughter returned to the halls. and for the first time, people greeted him by name, not title, not reputation, just Caleb. Grace appeared beside him, gently nudging his arm. "Mr. Barton wants to show you his woodworking shop plans," she said, nodding toward an elderly man in a worn sweater, holding a sketchbook with pride. "Duty calls," Caleb said with a grin, stepping away, but before he left, he looked back. "Have dinner with me tomorrow." Grace blinked, caught off guard. "Is this a date?" "Absolutely," he said, without hesitation. The next evening, they drove to a neighboring town, winding through back roads under a soft lavender sky. Caleb had found a tiny Italian restaurant tucked between antique stores. Candlelight flickered against dark wood. The scent of garlic and herbs hung in the air like memory. Over pasta and wine, the conversation came easily. Grace told stories about her patients. Her brother, now settled in Chicago. Caleb shared tales from the early days, how he'd nearly gone bankrupt twice, how he once slept in his office for 3 months just to make payroll. "So why did you stay away so long?" she asked. "Finally, from here. I mean," he twirled his fork slowly. "At first I was too busy trying to prove I could make it. Then I was ashamed I hadn't come back sooner. And eventually, I guess I started believing I was too important to slow down." He looked up, and for a moment, the flicker of candlelight reflected something raw in his eyes. "It is a pathetic excuse, but it is the truth." "It's honest," Grace said, reaching across the table to brush her fingers against his. "And for what it's worth, I think Ethan missed you. But he understood." Caleb smiled. "And you? Would you have understood, I'd have tracked you down and demanded an explanation?" "I believe that." He laughed. On the way home, Caleb took the long way back along the lake. The water glimmered in the moonlight. They walked the final stretch in silence, both wrapped in the kind of quiet that feels like peace, not distance. "I am still waiting for your true developer reveal," Grace said, bumping his shoulder lightly. "Maybe you were secretly planning a casino in the old-school gym. Would it matter if I was—" She stopped walking, turning to face him. "Yes, because I'm starting to care." Caleb's expression shifted, startled by the weight of her honesty. "About you," she added, softer now. "And that scares me." He reached for her hand. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not unless you ask me to." And this time, when they kissed beneath the stars, there was no hesitation, no doubt, just two people finally arriving at the same place, together. The night air hung still as they stood by the lake, wrapped in moonlight and the hush of possibility. "It does matter," Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb turned to face her. "Why? Because—" she said. Her eyes locked on his. "I am starting to care about you, and that scares me more than I can admit." He stepped closer, voice low but certain. "I am not leaving, Grace, not until the project is finished. Not unless you ask me to." She tried to reply, but the words caught somewhere between fear and hope. "I've never felt more alive," Caleb said, and then he kissed her. This time, there were no second thoughts, no stepping away. Just stillness and stars, and the quiet closing of a distance that had lingered between them for far too long. A month later, Grace sat across from him at her kitchen table. The morning sunlight spilled over her shoulder as her coffee mug hung frozen halfway to her lips. "You did what she asked." Stunned. "I sent your pediatric center proposal to the hospital board," Caleb said calmly. They were impressed. "That wasn't your decision to make," she said, setting the mug down hard enough to make it clink. "I know you've been working on it for over 2 years," he said, "but it was just sitting there." "Grace," I helped move it into the right hands. Her breath caught. It wasn't ready. It needed more time, more evidence, more excuses, he offered gently. Grace pushed her chair back and stood, a storm building beneath her calm. Their relationship had grown in the weeks since their first real date, slowly, carefully, but this moment felt like a fault line. You can just fast-track everything with money and connections. Caleb, she said. Some things take time, like us. Caleb stood too, quieter now. Are you saying you don't trust me? I'm saying, she sighed, that every time we get close, you make choices for both of us. And I am left wondering if you believe I can handle things myself. He ran a hand through his hair. I was just trying to help. I know, she said softly. But next time, ask first. That afternoon, Grace was checking in on Lucas at the hospital when the chief of pediatrics, Dr. Winters, tapped gently on the door. Dr. Miller, do you have a moment in her office? Dr. Winters offered a file. We've decided to include your pediatric program in the expansion of the community center as medical wing. She said, your proposal was clear, compelling, and the advocacy from Mr. Walker was persuasive. Grace's heart tightened. You've already approved it, Dr. Winters smiled. We were excited to see what you'll build. She drove straight to the community center. Inside, Caleb was walking a pair of contractors through lighting adjustments in the new wing. He spotted her immediately, his expression shifting from focus to concern. Can we talk? She asked. Outside, they stood beneath the same awning where he'd first promised not to walk away. Dr. Winters told me the board approved my proposal, Grace said evenly. Caleb nodded. Yes, they did. You didn't tell me. I wanted you to hear it from them. It was your win, not mine. Her frustration softened, but only a little. That is exactly what I worry about with us. Caleb, you make things move. I get it. But while you call the board, I spend years just trying to get a meeting. Our lives operate on completely different frequencies. He took her hands in his. Grace, your work is brilliant. It just needed someone to speak for it in the right room. And that is the difference, she said. You move mountains with one phone call. I carry buckets, one at a time. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it and sighed. David again. The Chicago investors aren't happy about my split attention. Grace looked at him gently. And they want to wait forever. Neither will we. He silenced the phone and slipped it away. That can wait. Can it? She asked. Her voice quiet but steady. You've been walking a tightrope between two lives for months now. Sooner or later, you'll have to choose where you stand. That evening, they walked through the partially finished medical wing. Workers moved quietly around them. Paint cans open, lights flickering on for the first time. The space already felt different more than bricks and wires. It held potential, purpose. But between them still hung a fragile question. Could two people from such different worlds ever find one they could truly share? The newly framed clinic room was quiet, but not empty. The scent of fresh paint lingered, and morning light slipped through uncovered windows, casting soft gold over the clean walls. This is for Lucas, Grace said quietly, looking around the space she had once only imagined. For kids like him. For their families. Caleb stood beside her, watching her face more than the room. And for you, she added after a moment. For believing in this before I believed it could really happen. You don't need to thank me, he replied. All I did was open a door. Everything that fills this place that came from you. They ended their walk at the town's old gazebo, where fallen leaves swirled like rust-colored whispers around their feet. The wood beneath them creaked gently as they sat on the steps, just as they had weeks ago. "I am falling in love with you," Caleb said suddenly. Grace turned toward him, startled. "I know it's fast," he continued, "and I know you still have doubts, but I needed you to know where I stand." Her breath hitched. He didn't press her for an answer. He just waited, eyes steady, hands clasped loosely between his knees. "I'm falling too," she said at last. "And that's exactly what scares me." The next few weeks were a blur of progress and uncertainty. The renovation reached its halfway point. Grace introduced Caleb to her parents. Her mother watched him closely over dinner, and her father gave few words of approval until the afternoon Caleb spent elbow-deep in grease, helping him repair a rusty old truck. From the kitchen window, Grace's mother had whispered, "He's trying." "I know," Grace replied softly. "That's what makes this even harder." Meanwhile, pressure from Caleb's business partners in the city continued to mount. During a tense video call, David, his co-founder, leaned into the screen with narrowed eyes. "The Westridge deal is hanging by a thread. These investors expect you, not your assistance. Send me the files," Caleb said. "I'll review them remotely. That's not good enough anymore." David snapped. "You've been playing small-town hero for months. The business is slipping." After the call ended, Caleb sat in silence, watching the town he had once abandoned go about its quiet routine just outside his window. He had built his empire from the ground up, sleepless nights, missed holidays, sacrifices nobody saw. Could he really risk it all now? That evening, as he and Grace chopped vegetables in his rented kitchen, he finally said it aloud. "I need to go to Chicago next week. Big investor meeting." She didn't pause. "How long? A few days. Maybe a week." And after that, he hesitated. "David thinks I should move back permanently." The spoon in her hand stopped mid-stir. "And what do you think I need to find a way to balance both worlds?" Grace finally looked at him. "Caleb, we knew this was coming. You can run an entire company from here forever. I can restructure, delegate, build differently. And what about the charity boards, the developers, the city projects you once cared about?" He set the knife down with a soft thud. "Are you trying to talk me into leaving? I am trying to be honest," she said. "I've seen how often your phone rings, how you were working at midnight just to keep both lives afloat. It's not sustainable." "So what are we supposed to do?" he asked, the edge of frustration creeping into his voice. "Just walk away from this. That's not what I'm saying," she replied. "But I got a call too." She reached into her pocket, pulling out a folded letter. "Boston Children's Hospital. They were offering me the pediatric oncology position I applied for over 2 years ago." The room felt suddenly colder. "When would you start?" he asked, voice barely audible. "January," she whispered. 8 weeks from now." They stared at one another across the kitchen island. The space between them, once intimate, now felt like miles. "So where does that leave us?" Caleb asked. "I don't know," Grace admitted. "But we both have choices to make." Days later, Caleb sat alone in his Chicago office, surrounded by polished wood and floor-to-ceiling windows. The Westridge contract lay open in front of him, the single largest deal of his career. Outside, the skyline sparkled with all the ambition he had once dreamed of. And inside, he felt nothing. The skyline shimmered beyond the glass wall of Caleb's high-rise office, a silent monument to ambition fulfilled. He had been back in the city for just over a week. The rhythm of deadlines and boardrooms should have felt like home. It didn't. His phone blinked quietly on the desk, 3 missed calls from Grace. They hadn't spoken since the night everything came undone, since the words Boston and Chicago created a canyon between them. Neither had asked the other to stay. Neither had offered to go. They had retreated, calling it space, but it was really fear. A sharp knock broke his thoughts. David entered without waiting. "The investors are in the conference room," he said. "They were ready." Caleb glanced at the contract on the table, the Westridge project, the crown jewel of his company, luxury condos, prime land, 300 working-class families displaced. "There are relocation packages," David reminded him when he didn't speak. "This is how development works." "Maybe that is the problem," Caleb said, voice low. David narrowed his eyes. "Is this about that nurse that town?" Caleb said nothing. "You've worked 15 years for this moment. Don't throw it away for a midlife crisis dressed as sentiment." The words struck harder than Caleb expected because part of him knew there was a sliver of truth in them. Was he romanticizing Maplewood, mistaking connection for clarity? David walked out, pausing at the door. "The investors want to wait forever," he said. "Neither will I, alone again." Caleb reached for his phone not to call a client, but someone who had known him before all this success ever mattered. "Ethan," he said when the call connected. "I need your advice. In Boston." Grace walked slowly through the halls of the pediatric oncology ward. The facility was stunning, quiet, efficient, a place where groundbreaking work happened every day. She should have felt only pride. Beside her, Dr. Levinson, the chief of medicine, gestured to a display board of potential expansions. "We were very impressed with your rural care model," he said. "Your proposal for Maplewood caught our eye." "Thank you," Grace replied, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "We want your full commitment here," Dr. Levinson continued. "Though we were open to arranging quarterly oversight visits to regional partners like Maplewood, if that's important to you." Grace stopped in her tracks. "Satellite programs. Yes," he said. "We see your Maplewood pilot as the first of many. If the results are strong, we'd replicate it across New England. You want to fund it, we do. Because your work bridges the gap between world-class medicine and communities often left behind." For the first time in weeks, something heavy in Grace's chest began to lift. She didn't have to choose between her calling and her home, but even as hope returned, her heart whispered another name, Caleb. What about him? 3 days before Christmas, Maplewood was blanketed in snow, the kind that softened noise and turned every street into a postcard. The whole town gathered at the renovated community center for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The once crumbling brick building had been transformed, updated lighting, new insulation, state-of-the-art medical equipment installed in the pediatric wing. And yet, it still felt like the heart of Maplewood. Grace stood bundled in her coat, eyes scanning the crowd. No sign of him. She hadn't heard from Caleb since that last conversation. Her messages had gone unanswered, and the offer from Boston signed, but unsent sat waiting on her kitchen table like a dare. Then, as the mayor stepped up to the podium, Caleb emerged from inside the building. He looked tired, pale, but his eyes found hers. Her heart stopped. "This center," the mayor began, "has been the soul of Maplewood for generations. And when it faced closure, we feared a part of our town would vanish with it." He paused, then turned slightly, but one of our own came back. Gasps rippled through the crowd as eyes turned to Caleb. Mr. Caleb Walker saw possibility where others saw decay. He didn't just invest money, he gave this place vision and a future. Grace could hardly breathe. He was here, and he had stayed. Applause rose like a wave as Caleb cut the ribbon, the ceremonial scissors catching the glint of a snow-dusted afternoon. Behind him, the newly restored community center stood as more than just bricks and beams. It was the beginning of something deeper for Maplewood. People filtered inside, eager to explore. But Grace didn't move. She stood rooted to the spot, hands buried in her coat pockets, unsure whether to follow or walk away. Caleb saw her through the crowd. Without hesitation, he stepped toward her, snow beginning to gather lightly on his shoulders. "You came back," she said, her voice soft, uncertain. "I never really left," he replied. Their eyes held for a long moment. "We need to talk," he said. They slipped into a quiet corner of the new cafe inside the center. The space smelled of fresh coffee and new beginnings. "I turned down the Westridge deal," Caleb said without preamble. Grace stared at him. "That was your biggest project." "It was," he nodded, "but I've restructured the company. David S. taking over as CEO. I am stepping back into a chairman role." "Can you really do that?" "I founded it," Caleb said simply, "and I get to redefine what it stands for." He reached across the table, took her hands gently in his. "I've opened 3 new regional offices, mid-sized towns, modeled after what we've built here. I'll still travel, but Maplewood will be my home base if you will stay too." Grace exhaled slowly, the weight of months falling away. "The Boston job changed," she said. "They want to make Maplewood the pilot site for a larger research project. I'd be here most of the time, and check in with other programs quarterly." Caleb leaned back and laughed, not out of amusement, but in sheer relief. "We've spent weeks torturing ourselves," he said. "We could have saved a lot of sleepless nights if we'd just talked." Grace admitted. "But I needed to be sure that I wasn't making promises I couldn't keep." All around them, the center pulsed with life children, as laughter from the new play area, neighbors chatting near the reading room, volunteers bustling between spaces that once sat silent. "I love you," Caleb said, his voice low and unwavering, not because of Maplewood, and not in spite of it, but because you've shown me what success really means, building something bigger than yourself. Grace reached out, her fingertips brushing his cheek. "I love you too, and I am done being afraid of what that means." Caleb pulled a small velvet box from his coat pocket. "I had a whole speech planned," he said, chuckling softly. "A fancy dinner, the works. But sitting here, seeing what we've built, this feels right." He opened the box. Inside, a simple, elegant ring. "Marry me, Grace. Help me build a life that actually matters." Tears gathered in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "Yes." As he slid the ring onto her finger, the room erupted in cheers. Turning, they saw Ethan and Sarah standing nearby, grinning wide. Finally, Ethan laughed. "I've been carrying that ring for him for 3 days." Sarah pulled Grace into a warm hug. "So you are both staying?" "We are." Grace smiled. "With some travel. Later." As the snow continued to fall outside, Caleb leaned in, whispering in Grace's ear. "Who would have thought a wedding would change everything?" Grace smiled, thinking back to that first night, that first stubborn conversation. The millionaire came to see his friend get married, she whispered. But then he saw the bridesmaid, and everything changed. Caleb finished, kissing her as the world beyond the windows faded into soft white. 2 years later, spring returned to Maplewood. The square bustled with familiar faces and small joys. Revitalized shops lined the walkable streets. The community center had become a model replicated across the state, but its heart remained here. Grace's pediatric program now served not only local families, but children from surrounding counties. The research had drawn national attention, but Grace stayed grounded, her focus always on the next child, the next family walking through the door. Caleb checked his watch. 4:00. He was due to meet Grace, Ethan, and Sarah at the town gazebo, the same place where everything began. Tonight marked the 3rd annual fundraiser for the pediatric center. As he made his way through the square, he paused, taking it all in. Maplewood wasn't just a town anymore. It was home. Caleb was used to being called into meetings, urgent ones, important ones, but today Invitation from Ethan and Sarah had come with an oddly secretive tone. "Just be at the gazebo before 4," Ethan had said. The gazebo had been lovingly restored since the day Caleb and Grace had first stood there. Fresh paint, carefully woven latticework, flower boxes in full spring bloom, a piece of the town's heart just like everything else that had been rebuilt. As he approached, he saw them waiting. Grace stood with her back to him, her hair longer now than when they first met, catching the late afternoon light as she laughed at something Ethan said. Her laughter still had the power to pause time. "There he is," Sarah called out, her hand resting on her very pregnant belly. Their baby was due in just 3 weeks. Grace turned at the sound of his footsteps, and the smile that bloomed on her face still made Caleb feel like he was seeing her for the first time. "You relate," she said, kissing him as he joined them. "Conference call with the Detroit project," Caleb replied, sliding his hand into hers. "Their mayor wants more community involvement, and you told him to take notes from the Maplewood playbook." Ethan grinned. "Something like that?" Caleb looked between his friends, amused. "So, what is the secret meeting for the fundraiser doesn't start for hours?" Ethan and Sarah exchanged a look. "We've picked a name for the baby," Ethan said. "If it's a boy," Sarah added. "We were going with Ethan Jr. But if it's a girl," Ethan paused, smiling. "We want to name her Grace James Walker." Grace's eyes widened. "Wait, what? You two are the reason this baby exists," Sarah said, laughing as she gestured to her belly. "If Caleb hadn't gifted us that honeymoon trip, TMI." Caleb chuckled, holding up his hands. "We want both of you to be godparents." Ethan finished. Tears shimmered in Grace's eyes as she hugged Sarah carefully. "Of course we will." As Ethan and Sarah wandered toward the community center to check on final fundraiser preparations, Grace and Caleb remained in the gazebo, the place where everything had changed. "Remember when you could barely stand to talk to me?" Caleb teased, pulling her close. "Remember when you thought success was measured in square footage and stock options?" Grace countered. Across the park, Caleb caught sight of Lucas, now in remission, playing basketball with a group of kids. The pediatric care program Grace had built and Caleb had helped fund had not only saved lives, it had transformed them. "I got lucky," Caleb said quietly. "I found someone who helped me rewrite the definition of everything." Grace rested her head against his chest. "It hasn't always been easy." "No," he said. "But we found balance." Their life had become a gentle rhythm, Caleb dividing his time between Maplewood and the regional development offices he'd launched, while Grace split her weeks between the local center and her role with Boston Children's Hospital. They'd restored a historic home halfway between the town and the city, a perfect halfway point between two different worlds. "Speaking of balance," Grace said, stepping back just slightly, eyes shining, "I have news too." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "More mysterious announcements. I've been asked to expand the pediatric program," she said, her voice steady but emotional. 10 more rural communities. We'd create a regional network. Caleb's face lit up. "Grace, that S incredible. It would mean more travel, more coordination, more moving pieces." He didn't hesitate. "We'll make it work. We always do." She looked down for a beat, then reached for his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "There's something else," she whispered. "We were having a baby?" Caleb froze, stunned but only for a heartbeat. Then he wrapped his arms around her, lifting her gently off her feet, spinning her once beneath the soft spring sky. When he asked breathlessly, "November," Grace whispered. "I just found out yesterday." Caleb's eyes shone. "Are you happy? Happy doesn't begin to describe it." He kissed her with the kind of love that comes not from excitement, but from having chosen each other again and again. When did you suspect last week in Boston? She laughed. I almost called you right away, but I wanted to be sure. She looked up at him, face flushed, eyes hopeful. This changes the expansion plan, she said. The timing, the travel. We'll figure it out, Caleb said, touching her face, like we always do. Together. As the sun dipped toward the horizon and laughter floated from the nearby center, they stood in the gazebo, holding a future that was no longer uncertain, but simply theirs. Hand in hand. Caleb and Grace walked toward the community center, now glowing with soft lantern light as the town gathered for the annual fundraiser, a celebration of healing, hope, and all they had built together. Through the wide windows, they could see Ethan directing volunteers with his usual charm, while Sarah carefully arranged framed photographs of children who had once filled the clinic with worry and now filled it with laughter. In one corner, Lucas, taller now and full of life, guided a group of younger kids through an art project, crouching beside them with the same gentle patience Grace once showed him. Grace paused at the steps, taking in the scene, the warm noise, the joy that pulsed through every hallway. 2 years ago, she whispered, I couldn't have imagined any of this. You, me, a baby on the way, and this program touching so many lives. Caleb turned to her, his voice quiet but sure. I did. She looked at him, surprised. Not the details, he admitted, but that first day when you were showing me around town, challenging me, pushing me, I saw something real. I saw the beginning of something that mattered, something that would last. Grace squeezed his hand. Her eyes shimmered, not with doubt now, but with certainty. The millionaire just wanted to see his old friend get married, she said. But when he saw the bridesmaid, Caleb finished with a smile. Everything changed. They stood still for a moment longer, hearts beating in quiet rhythm with the world they had chosen and built. Then, together, they stepped into the light. Laughter welcomed them. Music played softly from the speakers. Their neighbors, no longer strangers, greeted them with warmth. This wasn't just a fundraiser, it was a gathering of believers, in community, in second chances, in the kind of love that doesn't arrive perfect, but grows deeper, stronger, and braver through time. And as Caleb and Grace joined the crowd, surrounded by stories of recovery, of connection, of hope, their hands still tightly intertwined, both knew one thing with quiet, unwavering truth. It had changed everything, and it would keep changing lives for years to come. Sometimes, it takes returning to where we started to discover where we truly belong. Caleb came back to Maplewood thinking he was just attending a wedding. But he found a community worth investing in, a woman who challenged everything he thought he knew, and a love that wasn't loud but lasting. Grace gave him more than her heart, she gave him purpose, a reason to build, not higher, but deeper. Together, they didn't just create a program, they created a place where healing begins, and where dreams once buried rise again. Because in the end, true success isn't measured by wealth or status, but by the lives we touch, and the love we choose every single day. If this story moved you, even just a little, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in love and second chances, and don't forget to subscribe to Shining Stories, where every story is told to remind you you are not alone, and your story matters too.